Aesop's fables, timeless tales with wise and practical teachings as the moral of every story. Now, very little is known about Aesop. He is mentioned by Aristophanes and Plato and several other famous ancient Greek personages. And the story is that he was a slave who was eventually awarded his freedom as a result of his wit and wisdom. And he was renowned for the telling of fables. Now, it's important to understand what a fable is and how it differs from other literary forms, such as the parable. A fable is a usually short, concise tale meant to convey an instruction, which often utilizes anthropomorphized animals as well as inanimate objects, forces, and things. And this differs from the parable because parables, such as the ones that Jesus used for instruction in the Bible, are meant to be grounded and realistic, whereas fables are fantastical and oftentimes all out farcical. But Aesop was renowned for the telling of fables, and many hundreds of fables have been attributed to Aesop, many erroneously, in fact, some retroactively, I believe, because Aesop is kind of the umbrella name under which a lot of fables from antiquity of unknown authorship get lumped. And while these tales are used most often nowadays for the moral instruction of children, which they are very good for, that is important to remember. It is not what they were originally for. These tales, these fables, in their original context and setting, were not aimed at children. Rather, what Aesop did with these fables was to slip people profound truths in circumstances which would not otherwise have permitted it, because the Athens in which Aesop lived was under the rule of a tyrant, and freedom of speech really wasn't a very popular concept. So, if you wanted to instruct people, to convey to them important information that might have been frowned upon by the authorities, you had to do so with style and panache, and that is what Aesop did with these fables. And it cannot be overstated just how influential and far reaching these fables are. If you were to ask me what the most famous and well known story on earth is, what story is so ubiquitous that pretty much every human that lives knows it by heart, I wouldn't say conclusively, but I would hedge my bets on The Tortoise and the Hare. I think The Tortoise and the Hare very well might be the most famous story ever told. And that comes from Aesop. And there are so many other fables of his that we know by heart, which you may not realize were his, such as the ant slash ants and the grasshopper and the fox and the grapes, among many others. And it should be noted as well that many of these fables actually contradict each other. That's something that you might not be aware of, is that many of these fables have conflicting messages. But that's okay, because oftentimes, things are situational, circumstantial. Advice for one situation might not apply always in every other. And so sometimes you'll read these fables and they'll say like completely conflicting things. But that's okay, because again, you have to be able to weed it out and know what goes where and what is applicable when. But also in this version right here, which is the Signet Classics version of Aesop's Fables, the compilers of this book and the editors really did a good job of trying to summarize the moral of every story after the tale. And by the way, these fables are usually only a paragraph in length, at most like a page and a half. So this is the fastest I've ever been able to read a book that's nearly 300 pages. I'm talking, I flew through this thing because, it's just a paragraph basically on each page. But the editors really did a good job of trying to put the moral of the story at the bottom of the page after the actual narrative. But some of these they didn't, and that's because some of these fables are so vague and ambiguous that you don't really get exactly what the meaning is supposed to be. And a lot of these are just open for interpretation. And it should be remembered that these things often lend themselves to more than one interpretation. Like the tortoise and the hare, for example, the moral is almost always stated as slow and steady wins the race. However, I never really took that fable to actually have that meaning, or rather, I thought it was more a cautionary tale about the price of braggadocio and hubris, because the tortoise wins not so much through his own skill as by the overconfidence and cockiness of the rabbit. So again, these things can be interpreted in many number of ways, and two people may get vastly different things out of it. But there are fables in this that, despite their brevity, because again they're very very brief for the most part, that when you read it, you kind of just sit there and you're just kind of like, damn, that really is profound. And that's the beauty of Aesop's fables, is that they really are timeless. The things that these stories said thousands of years ago, much of it still rings just as true today. Take, for example, the Fox and the Grapes, which is the first fable here, which I'll read because I think it's one of the best. A famished fox crept into a vineyard where ripe, luscious grapes were draped high upon arbors in a most tempting display. In his effort to win a juicy prize, the fox jumped and sprang many times, but failed in all his attempts. When he finally had to admit defeat, he retreated and muttered to himself, "Well, what does it matter anyway? The grapes are sour." And then the moral of the story, as they put down here, is it is easy to despise what you cannot get. And when I read that, I really did just kind of stop. I was like, that is uncannily true. Because, I mean, have we not all had an experience like that? Something we can't achieve, but yet we come to resent it because of the fact that we can't get it, whether you're trying to, as a kid, win a ribbon in a spelling bee, or whether you're trying to work up enough money to buy a new vehicle and you can't, seem to get enough ahead, and you're like, oh well, who cares? It's more trouble than it's worth anyway. The things that are beyond our grasp are very easy to hate. And by the way, that's also where the phrase "sour grapes" came from. You would be amazed at how much of our common language, how many idioms and phrases come from these fables, such as sour grapes. Um, the boy who cried wolf, that's in here. There's so many things that we take for granted in speech today, which comes from this. I would wager that this probably has more influence on the English language possibly than Shakespeare, because there are a lot of things from Shakespeare that we say every day and we don't know where it comes from, or many of us don't. And the same with this, but these fables are, I guess, at base a mixed bag, because some of them are very vague, and some of them are so ambiguous that you might not actually get what the point was. And a lot of the advice that these fables give is definitely geared towards an older world, because a lot of these fables are about knowing your place and contenting yourself with what you have, whereas in today's world we kind of discourage that. We kind of say, go get what you want, go after it. Who cares if other people tell you that it's beyond your reach? Prove them wrong and go get it. Not so much with these fables. These fables are definitely the product of a world in an age where slaves existed. I mean, slaves still exist today, sadly, but where slavery was like an open, acknowledged, and legitimate institution. And where people weren't encouraged to try to rise above their station. And so a lot of these fables, the advice seems to be play it safe and don't, like the Oriental proverb, it's the nail that sticks up that gets hammered, kind of like that. However, nonetheless, there is still a wealth of wisdom in these fables. And again, like the fox and the grapes did with me, after you read some of them, you're kind of just tempted to just sit there and just be like, that is still just as true now as it was thousands of years ago. Because again, these things really are timeless, and they are incredibly profound, many of them. And again, since we think of these things as geared more towards children today, don't be discouraged reading these. But I wasn't, because they're not really aimed at children. Because a lot of the lessons in these fables are stuff that children won't have any real grasp of contextually. But yeah, Aesop's Fables by Aesop. To rate Aesop's Fables, I'm gonna give this a B minus. I think there is a lot of wisdom in here, a lot of wise words. However, some of these are a little bit inscrutable, a little hard to decipher, as evinced by the fact that some of the ones in here the editors didn't even put a moral for, because apparently they couldn't figure it out either. In some of these, the advice isn't probably the best for today, the world of today. But nonetheless, the fox and the grapes, the boy who cried wolf, the tortoise and the hare, the ants and the grasshopper, though they're just foundational texts of Western literature. Basically, everybody knows these stories, and there's a reason, because they're important and they tell things that are still true. So overall, I'm going to give Aesop's Fables a B minus. Definitely worth the read, I think, because there's a lot that you can get out of it, and conveying wisdom and an expanded knowledge of the world is basically, I think, the highest thing that a book can do. The highest thing that literature can do is to expand your understanding of the world in which you live and broaden your horizons. And I don't know if there's ever been literature that has done that or been designed to do that more than Aesop's Fables. These fables are intended to give you lessons that most people would have to learn, in the school of hard knocks otherwise. And so you'd probably be pretty wise even today to heed the teachings of these stories, because they are important, definitely so. So, have you read Aesop's Fables? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about them, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said here today. And if you have not read Aesop's Fables, I could recommend this. This Signet Classics edition was like $5, not very expensive at all. But what you can get out of it is basically priceless. So, very wise purchase, I think. Yeah, I could recommend this, because even though you kind of have to sift through some of it, there is still such pearls of wisdom to be found in these stories. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.